gonna try to make a long story about my identity medium, okay? So I was born in Trinidad. My background is complicated and is reflective of colonization and the diaspora. So on my mother's side, my grandmother is Venezuelan Arawak. Arawak are the indigenous people of that part of the Caribbean. And she was born in Venezuela. She was taken as a small child and brought into servitude in Trinidad. And she married my grandfather, who is Indian. He's from India. He was brought over as an indentured worker, and they got married. And then on my father's side, his father was a Scottish plantation owner, a sugar plantation owner, and my grandmother was brought over from Dominica, but we think via Angola, and trigger warning to name that I'm mentioning that, and my father was a product of rape. I actually was never allowed to meet my paternal grandmother because everyone on that side of the family called my paternal grandfather Massa. And my father didn't want me to grow up in that context and didn't want me to know anything about that, which is complex. And so often, people will come up to me as a mixed race person and ask that question that I feel like so many of us get asked, what are you? And I hate that feeling for a whole bunch of different reasons, because it asks me to sum up in a moment something that literally took hundreds of years to happen. And it is not possible for me to give you this essentialized version of the person that I am. I can't explain to you that I grew up listening to Hindi and Spanish and tell you that I'm from Trinidad and have you know that. I grew up in Toronto, I lived in Montreal, I now live in New York City. All of these places make me part of the person that I am. And for me, engaging in a dialogue around mixedness is really around the lived experience of embodying intersectionality. It is about what would it look like for us to be the collective sum of our parts. I have been doing activist work for so long, and so often what ends up happening is people will ask me to come to the table, as a Black person and do Black activism work, and I do it, and I love it. It means the world to me. And I do a lot of work, around women's rights and gender-based violence, and that means the world to me. But I can't have these conversations, and we can't continue to expect people to have these conversations as merely fractions of themselves. And so for me, it's so exciting to be in a space to get to talk about mixedness, because so often the places that come up where mixed identity is being talked about are not places I necessarily want to engage in a conversation around. I'm so happy that we named that this is Indigenous land, and all of the land is Indigenous land, and Indigenous people are constantly unsettled and unseated purposefully for the purposes of harvesting resources and allocating wealth. And for me today, when I talk about mixedness in terms of our experiences, I want to talk about the interconnectedness between our many different cultures and experiences. So often we end up responding to the big white monolith of racism that we don't end up getting to talk to each other. And there are conversations that, Black folks need to have with South Asian folks, and Latino folks need to have with Indigenous folks. And there are conversations that we're not having with each other because we keep putting those conversations aside in order to respond to the really pressing work. And I understand why we do that, but hopefully we can find some opportunities to do that connective work with each other. Because if we keep going forward, we're gonna get to the end of our journey and realize that there's nobody around us. The most important work that we do with ourselves is the community building work that happens when we sit at a table together and we take the opportunity to learn about each other from each other. So I like to start here in thinking about language and ideas, and one particularly around the idea of being a minority. I hate that word, and I won't use it under any circumstances, because it is not true. We are not a minority. People of color are actually the majority in the world. Black, Indigenous, and people of color are the majority in the world everywhere. And so often we are underreported in the census. And so we think that there are less of us. And because people will call us minorities, we believe that it means that our issues are less valuable, our needs are less important. But this is a distraction. It is used as a distraction because the fact that there are a large amount of us or a small amount of us has nothing to do with the need for civil rights and human rights. And even this, when I saw this, I wanted to give this as like a visual example, but even just the idea that it's white and non-white. That all of us, with our massive diversity, all get grouped into this massive category of all of us just being together. And I think that that's the thing, is that we may have shared experiences of racializations, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we have shared value systems. And that, again, is the conversation that we're not able to have if we're constantly in situations where we're always responding to the violence. So, this for me is so often where discourses around mixedness goes. And that's not interesting for me. It's also really terrifying for so many different complicated reasons when this is the place that we're happening. This is the place that's happening. Because for me as a mixed race person, I don't just identify as mixed. I don't just identify as Native. I identify as Black politically. And I need there to be space to identify as a mixed race person and Afro-Native and Afro-Latina and Black as a very political choice and a political discourse. And so often I find that what happens is in the emphasis of my identity as Black or as an ethnocultural group is that this is somehow separates me from humanness. And I will see people do this when people want to emphasize how human they are, they de-emphasize how Black or brown they are. And I want us to be able to find a place where we can reconcile that it is our Blackness and our brownness that actually makes us human. It's not that we need to separate those things to find the intrinsic core of us. The intrinsic core of me is hella Black, I'm telling you, all the way through. And for me, identifying as politically Black in this world is significant for a bunch of different reasons, because it is true that across all cultures, darker people suffer most. And this looks like increased rates of incarceration. Darker skinned people get locked up at 3 times the rate of lighter skinned people. And those are US statistics, and because the United States is the most incarcerated country in the world, but this is true everywhere, that all around the world that this is something that is happening. And so whatever community we are a part of, the anti-Black racism that is present is something that has to be confronted in all of those different spaces. And for me, I wanted places where I could talk about my mixedness that acknowledged shadeism and colorism, that there are hierarchies that exist within our communities that we need to unpack. And as someone who is light-skinned, I benefit from this. I benefit from the fact that I am speaking a lot of the same issues that a lot of darker-skinned sisters are speaking, but I know that because of the way that I look, that privileges my experience in the world. And I have to be aware of that so many Black intellectuals, whether I'm talking about Toni Morrison or Bell Hooks or Audre Lorde, are all light-skinned, and that's not an accident. We have to be really critical and conscious about the ways that these things are duplicated in our own movements, even as we're trying to unpack them. And racism plays out in very different ways. It doesn't have to be this very explicit naming of someone as being different, but rather the ways that you see certain people get praised for the way that they are, or certain bodies get represented. So I think about even, as someone who is Afro-Latina, I don't often get considered Latina because I don't look like Jennifer Lopez. I'm not hella light, And that is something that comes up in so many different groups, where it's this idea that you can't identify as the fullness of what you are because of this pervasive stereotype that is so grounded in light-skinned privilege. And for me, I also wanted a space where I could talk about things like internalized and intra-Black, Indigenous, and POC oppression. What it means for us to be feeling those feelings inside of ourselves that tell us that we're not worth it. Growing up in Canada, I did grow up in a rural space, but I definitely grew up in a program where it was all white folks and me. I was in the gifted program in school, and everyone was really rich and Jewish, and I was very, very poor and very brown in those spaces. And I remember going weeks without even looking at myself in a mirror. without even desiring to see myself reflected, because it served no purpose other than reminding me about how different I was, and everyone was already telling me that. That my teachers, and I'm so happy that you brought up the TDSB got brought up, that my teachers in the TDSB would literally say things to me like, keep away from the other black students because they will bring you down. You know, like this is deeply embedded in the systems and structures. And the thing is that I have an awareness that some people are going to be racist, but what I'm most interested in is the ways that we internalize that violence and we hurt ourselves as a result of it. I can't necessarily change the minds of people who are committed to misunderstanding us, but what I really am so committed to and think is thinking about how we could create more opportunities for us to learn to love ourselves and to be able to provide that affirmation and support within our own communities. For me, I also wanted to be able to talk about mixedness in a place that wasn't about respectability politics, that wasn't about body shaming, that wasn't about saying, and when I saw you this morning, Rima, I was like, thank you for just being the way that you are and taking up space in the way that you do. That, you know, so often as a woman and as a woman of color, I am discredited as being intelligent because I'm wearing a short skirt. And it is totally true that I can talk about eyeliner and imperialism at the same time. They don't have to be disparate things. We don't have to be separate from ourselves, right? And so this woman, I don't know if you know her, but Bad Dominica on Tumblr, I have learned more about what it means to be an Afro-Latina and activism from her than any teacher I have ever studied from in my entire life, and I've learned from her on the internet. You know, I would strongly suggest that you follow her. All of the sources, P.S., so this is a Prezi. Every time I teach or share information, I try to make sure that it's public and accessible. So this Prezi is public and shareable, so afterwards you can kind of take it and play around with it. And there are links for all of the resources that are a part of it. And a place that wasn't about policing people. I love this so much. I'm always so perplexed by Black people who assert that there is some formula we as Black community must follow to be accepted by whites. And, you know, with the things that are happening right now with the Black Lives Matter movement, and so many of the things that have happened in Canada with the Charter of Values, this idea that our dress has anything to do with us being violated is completely ridiculous and is such an inane conversation that I'm so frustrated that we ever even have to have it anymore. You know, Black men were getting lynched when they were wearing suits. Like, children are abused. Like, this has nothing to do with, like, violence has nothing to do with clothing. If you make a decision about how you're going to respect someone based on the length of their skirt, that has so much more to do with you than it does to do with them. And so wanting to have these conversations in a place that recognize that we are not at fault for the violence that we experience. And many of us are experiencing violence in very, very different and complex ways. And really wanting to have this conversation of respectability politics. I love this so much. Let's leave respectability politics in the Black community behind in 2015. Your suit, your white significant other, your religious sermons, your grammar, your abstinence, your Steve Harvey relationship politics, your degree, your letters, your corporate job, and your lace closure will not save you. You are one bullet away from being a hashtag. And it's a remember, for me, this is not an opportunity to shame anyone for wearing any of those things. Whether it's your lace front or your nails, I'm rocking acrylics, no shade for any of the way that you're doing you, but rather just a recognition that none of these things separate us from each other. Violence is targeting us because of the people that we are. It is not a matter that we are different. The problem is that our differences are declared as a disadvantage on an institutional level, and then we are punished for it. And so these are the issues that we want to be addressing when we're coming together in our communities. And so much of where I have seen these things is on creative community and social-based media. I'm not seeing this in corporate media. I don't identify with corporate media as being mainstream media. It's not my mainstream. It might be yours. Again, no shade, but it's not mine. And this media is the media I have seen producing the most interesting, complex ideas around race and gender and mixedness. And I'm so interested, and that's why I think for me this conference, the idea of bringing mixed race identity and art together is so powerful, because I think that it is in a place of creativity that we can start creating new ideas and new concepts for the discourse that we're trying to have with each other. And I think about this, you know, in terms of something as being, I talk about these ideas of someone as being descriptively versus politically. So, for example, I would say that I can identify someone as being like descriptively Black. You know, I can look at them and say, I think that you're Black, but descriptively acknowledges that this is my own opinion and my perspective, as opposed to politically Black, someone who identifies as Black. And so similarly, I think about this in terms of someone being descriptively mixed or politically mixed. Someone might see you and assume based on the way that you look, but again, that assumption around mixed race identity so often is only ascribed to light-skinned people. My husband's a dark-skinned man who is Afro-Latino, who never, ever, ever gets ascribed as being descriptively mixed. And politically so. People who identify as that and are ready to think about what it means for us to actually confront the ways that we are causing harm to other people. And I love this Audre Lorde quote because she says, "The true focus of revolutionary change is never merely the oppressive situations that we seek to escape, but that piece of the oppressor which is planted deep within us." A recognition that we absolutely are in possession of privilege at the same time as we are experiencing oppression. And we have a responsibility to be engaged in that process. We are all crueler than we think we are. We just are. We all absolutely have prejudices about other people. And I strongly invite you to take the time to confront your own prejudices. It will not only give you insight into the bigotry of other people, it will genuinely grow you into a person that you love and respect far more. And a recognition that assimilation does not lead to liberation. That, again, so many of the discourse around respectability politics is about this idea that we all need to look and or be the same. And I feel like one of the things that mixed people in general do just by existing is challenge that very idea. That there is no same. There's no one of us that is exactly the same as any one of us. All of our mixtures might be incredibly unique and dynamic, and that is so valuable and important in and of itself. That again, when we do this bridging work, so often we're trying to find our sameness. But I'm so interested in the ways that we celebrate our difference, that we've done that. We've tried that we all bleed blood stuff, and it doesn't really work. Because the thing is that we all have had really different histories, and we all have really different communities that we are ultimately accountable to and for. For me, a big part of what it means to identify as politically mixed or being aware of my place in the world as someone who is mixed race is really what Arundhati Roy says here. To love, to be loved, to never forget your own insignificance, to never get used to the unspeakable violence and the vulgar disparity of life around you, to seek joy in the saddest places, to pursue beauty to its layer, to never simplify what is complicated or complicate what is simple, to respect strength and never power, and above all, to watch, to try and understand, to never look away, and never, never to forget. And I understand that with the experience of multiple kinds of tragedy, it can be so hard to create that space to still feel empathy. And it can be so hard to create that space to still feel sad and to mourn. But I think it's a Warshan Shire quote where it's like, if it will keep me soft, then break my heart every day. If it will keep me in touch with the suffering of other people then please allow me to experience that pain every day, because it is only when we are connected to the reasons why other people suffer that we are committed to creating opportunities where that won't happen anymore. And this has to be a level of commitment that we make to each other. That we are not willing to leave certain people behind anymore. That so often I find in our movements, they're about passing as middle class. And I'm a hood-ass girl. I grew up in the hood. I still live in the Bronx. Like, I deeply, deeply connect to the people who are working class and are low-wage workers, because they are, if the movement is not relevant for them, the movement is not relevant. If the movement is not making sure that the people who are making like $4 an hour or 50 cents an hour in order to grow our food, Canada is run on migrant workers, y'all. Like, the fact that this is not deeply a part of our conversations as mixed race people, because this is what is happening in our country, in our community. Like, we have a responsibility to make sure that, again, all bodies are valuable, all experiences are valuable, that we are not prescribing that there is one way to be a human and one way to be respected in this world. And for me, it's about recognizing that even in my identity, like I explained, that it was a process of colonization that brought me to that place. It wasn't actually until I went to university. I'm actually a proud university walkout after a year. But it wasn't until I went to university that I actually started to understand why Trinidad looked the way it did. Like, I did not understand why there were black folks and why there were Indian folks and why there were native folks and why some people had land and some people had power and some people had money and some people didn't. And it felt like, I remember actually after one of my classes where I started to really learn about why that happened, walking into my professor's room and being mad. I felt lied to, and I felt robbed of my history because my entire childhood I have been raised without knowing that the world looks like this, and this was intentional and deliberate. That the construction of race was not an accident. It was a very deliberate process. Prior to the 16th century, white folks were not calling themselves white. They were talking about themselves in their own tribal allocations. Highlander, Lowlander, Welsh, wherever their place there was, they were claiming those places. The creation of white as a political category was about making sure that some people could be insulated from poverty and assured wealth, and other people wouldn't. Originally, people could actually buy their way into whiteness. You can literally buy deeds into whiteness. And then all sorts of interesting laws began to be created because of the presence of people like us. So the paper bag test, where if you were lighter than a paper bag, then you would not be enslaved, and if you were darker, you would. The pencil test, putting a pencil in your hair and see if it would fall out. The blood laws. This was the creation of like mestizo and mulatto and all of these different names that were happening all across the colonies. And now these new pseudosciences being created around the idea of race. And again, these constructions are not something that we participated in the creation of, but it is definitely something that we live with the legacy of. And again, we have never, not in Canada, not in the United States, ever had a national discourse about race. Not ever. And it is so important. And I'm not waiting for that national discourse. I'm looking for these opportunities in small spaces like this where we can actually start to have conversations about how this has played out and how this has affected us. Because so often, I thought this was so appropriate, where a press group speaks about their lived experience of being marginalized, oppressors, source. That this is what happens. When people are speaking about their lived experiences of violence, people are always trying to be like, but are you sure? Did that really happen? Because maybe. And it's really a recognition that the way that we learn from people is from hearing from other people and from learning about their stories. That so often we get constructed this idea of objectivity versus subjectivity. I want to tell you right now that objectivity is a figment of the colonizer's imagination. There is no such thing, and there never has been. We are all subjective. And there's value in that subjectivity. The people who should be reworking the immigration system are immigrants, because they have the best experience of that. And that even in the process of what it has meant for race to be created, also we've had the experience of being named without our permission. And I think that is what Rima was talking about, the idea of renaming ourselves and reclaiming our own language. I don't get to know what my mother tongue is. It was absolutely taken from me before I even had a chance to learn it. And the ways that I've been named and the names that have been given me are not necessarily things that I identify with. So I'm always searching for new ways of naming. And there's nothing wrong with that process of looking for new ways to call yourself, to find the people who you are affiliated with, to find your kin. I think some people will be like, oh, it's so politically correct, all these names. And I'm like, these are just people who have had the privilege of getting to choose their name. Right? And we haven't had that privilege, so it is going to take us some time to figure out what feels good to call ourselves and to call each other. And I think most importantly, we want to be able to treat other people the way that they want to be treated. We can't assume that we are the standards for other people's realities, so we cannot treat other people the way that we want to be treated. And the experiences of this and the fallout from all of these different kinds of racism it happens in many different ways, and I always wanted to share this story in particular. So this is Rita Hayworth, who was originally born as Margarita Carmen Cancino. And so this is the kind of transformation that she was required to take in order to become Rita Hayworth. And so basically they call it as like, a de-racializing makeover, right? Like her hairline was too low and that identified her as being Latina, so they plucked it and electrolysis it all the way back. Like there are very specific things that were done to make her look less like the person that she was and more like this European ideal. And the thing is that even when people do this, there is a reward. Rita Hayworth was super uber famous and would not have been famous and would not have gotten the support that she did without that. And so one of the things I want to talk about when we talk about mixed race identities and what does it mean to be ambiguously racialized or being able to move through spaces of different kinds of racialization, depending on where you're located, depending on the people who are around you, I want to ask questions about what does that mean in terms of the privilege that we access in those spaces, that she accessed to be able to transform herself, because a darker skinned woman would not be able to have the same access and movement. But also, what does it look like to not blame individuals for the choices that they make to change their bodies? You know, I think about we have to have the right to remake ourselves in our own image, and we can't assume that people are not doing that. So how can we come to a place where we're talking about racism, but we're not blaming individuals for the ways in which they're experiencing it? And a recognition that I am not free while any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are different from my own. I know my experience of racialization is unique, and I know that each person's is unique. And how do we find the space to recognize that each person needs the space, and each community needs the space to unpack those things? And for me, it comes down to a conversation about solidarity, and not help. And solidarity is really around recognizing that we're in it together and that we have just as much to gain and lose for this process. So we want to make sure that we're fighting for each other every chance we possibly can. Idle No More means confronting racism in Canada. Or denouncing Columbus Day and recognizing Indigenous Peoples Day. You know, whether or not this is something that individually feels important for you, the fact that other people find it important should be enough of a reason for you to care about it. It doesn't take that much work to express that level of solidarity to each other. Ooh. And I think, you know, really recognizing, again, the way that we can be judgmental of other people's movements. And I thought this was so appropriate, even though it's from Les Mis, but there are accepted revolutions, revolutions which are called revolutions, and there are refused revolutions which are called riots. And, you know, I think we can see the things that are happening in Baltimore and Ferguson, but also things that have happened in Elsipogtog and Kanastake as long-standing historical examples of the ways in which our revolutionary work is consistently underwritten, that we are doing it and we are resisting and we are creating so much more possibility, but so often those things are not going to be captured by corporate media, and so it has to be us who are the ones who are capturing these kinds of narratives. And really, again, as I was saying, decentering the dominant narrative. We don't have to give corporate media credit for being mainstream. If that's not the culture that you're practicing, that's not your culture. That's okay. You're not subculture. The culture that you're practicing is your culture. We don't have to be something that is in opposition to that. We are doing what we're doing. And I thought that this quote was so appropriate. You know, many white women have said to me, we wanted black women and non-white women to join the movement, totally unaware of their perception that they somehow own the movement, that they are the hosts inviting us as guests. And recognizing that that is happening all of the time. You know, when I think about my feminism, I'm giving thanks for over 520 years of indigenous resistance. That's the kind of philosophy that I am practicing. So recognizing that there are multiple truths happening at all times, that the work that you're doing and the work that someone else is doing is happening at the exact same time. And they do not invalidate each other, but they necessarily do complicate each other. And it is, again, we have to make space not to have one truth that overrides everyone else's experience, as we've seen in this colonial system, but rather the space to have multiple truths and multiple realities that are all valuable and all accountable to their different bases. For me, it's really a question of, are we trying to consolidate or challenge power? I am not interested in being in the top of a system that is dominating everyone else in the world. That's not interesting to flip this on its head and have a bunch of brown folks on the top. I want a system that looks very different, that isn't about saying that power and success happens at the expense of other people. Capitalism fundamentally works in such a way where literally every little bit of happiness that we experience on this side of the world is coming at the expense of the entire global south. And even in that language, I don't use the word like underdeveloped or third world. I call it overexploited, because that's what it is. Our countries are overexploited. They're not underdeveloped, and that is intentional, and we had nothing to do with that. And so that's why I think that art is such a powerful place for these conversations to happen. The choice to make art, the creation of art, renaming those processes. There is no such thing as apolitical art. It is always the political choice. And when we make art, it is so important and so significant. And that I am so much more interested in making maps and not monuments. This idea that instead I want to give you as much information about what we did here and how we made mistakes and how we had successes so that you can pick up where we left off. So often I find that generationally we get passed on stories as though everything was okay. And, I just turned 30, and I always thought that, like, when I was 30, I would feel like a grown-up in a very particular kind of way. And then I was like, is there like a memo that we get downloaded or like a thing that we get handed? But there really isn't. And I was just like, oh, all other 30-year-olds are also doing the same thing and being like, yeah, I'm totally grown up. And on the inside being like, I don't know what's going on. And I want us to be honest to other generations about that. Like, we haven't figured it out. We have not figured out how to treat each other with an enormous amount of respect. We have not figured out how to make identity politics not the center of our movement. We haven't figured those things out yet. But here's what we have figured out. And please, take everything we've done here and make it better. Grow it up and do so many more different things with it. That we have actually really powerful legacies of people who've written amazing stories and amazing maps for us to think about the possibilities of who we could be. Language and art have been used to exclude people like me, and performing spoken word has been my way of reclaiming and resistant. Stephanie Soltry, she was for undocumenting.com, who is someone who is without status in the United States and identifies specifically in this case as being undocumented. And I think that the importance of, again, making sure that these stories are heard. Arundhati Roy says this also, there is no such thing as the voiceless, only the silenced or the preferably unheard. And that's the thing, it's not that people are not speaking or communicating, they are, and a lot. And that is why we have that responsibility to seek out those stories and to amplify and accelerate all of this incredible work that is already happening. I just thought this was hella cute. Made me really, really happy for so many different reasons. And this is a small thing and a big thing. I've never gone into, I'm a librarian's daughter. I grew up in the library, and I own a bookstore today, and I have never once ever seen a book about a girl like me. Not ever. Not ever, And I'm interested, as someone who's like interested in having kids now, I'm trying to think about, like, how am I gonna show them stories about who they are and where they came from, and the Arawak people and Venezuela and Trinidad. Like, that doesn't exist. And that's why we need creative people to make those things exist. I love what's happening on social media right now. I love it on YouTube. I'm watching like 6 different Black lesbian web series. That exists. That is amazing. How many Black lesbian shows are there on corporate television? 0. Online, you're actually able to find culture and community and art that's being produced by us and for us. And we need to be able to support those folks. We need to give them our money. We need to give them our resources, and we need to give them our time. We need to watch their work. I gave up on corporate media so long ago. I don't read magazines. I don't really watch movies. I don't really do anything with TV. My husband is pretty serious about it, but when he's doing that, I'm like reading a book beside him. Because the things that I'm most interested in are the things that you are producing. And I can't continue to feed myself in ways that I know are damaging to my psyche and my ability to love myself and to actually love and respect other people. If everything that you look at values white life, that's what you will value. We have to make really clear choices about the things that we're consuming in terms of the way that it grows us into the people that we want to be. And for me, it's really imagining a world, and I think that creatively we do that, where there are no European borders on these continents. That the relationships that we make are one based on communities actually negotiating safety, but not on the imposition of imperialism. And for me, it's also a recognition that I actually don't feel, sometimes I get asked this a lot, where it's like, how do you keep faith? Like, how do you keep going in the face of like all of these things and all of this work that you're doing? And for me, it's because I know that all of the genius is in our communities. That it's actually people who are privileged who are the ones who are the most hopeless. And they most easily decide that there's no hope. But the point is that the alternative and the hope is not going to come from the people who design the system and who profit from the system in the first place. It's going to come from the people who've been left out of it. And that's why I have so much hope, because all the people I roll deep with are all the people who've been left out of it. And I'm constantly inspired and driven by people who have never been invited to that circle, to that table, and the ways in which they literally say, like, forget the table, let's all sit on the ground in a circle. And how can that not be inspiring? because it is a recognition that eventually everything connects. Intersectionality is the recognition that I am connected to all of the different people who made me possible, but also the different people in the world who I may or may not know. The choices I make absolutely have that butterfly effect. They can impact people with ways I'm unaware of, and that's why we want to be conscious about the choices that we're making, conscious about the ways that we're learning about each other, so that when we're making these choices and decisions, we're trying to impact each other in ways that are really positive. I wanted to share this quote because it was actually the very first time I heard something about being mixed race that I've really fully identified with and felt in my bones. And I also like to really quote other people who aren't just activists, but people who are just geniuses in my life, because I think it's also important that we don't keep saying that academics are the only people who know anything about us. Like, you know things about us, and we want to hear the things you know. I am not half Japanese and half Lithuanian Jewish. When I'm singing a Japanese folk song, I don't sing with half my voice, but with my whole voice. When I'm taping together my grandparents' Jewish marriage contract, worn by time but still resilient, it's not half of my heart that is moved, but the whole heart. I am complete, and I embody layers of identities that belong together. I am made of layers and not fractions. And so often, I think as mixed race people, we are asked to quantify the exact percentage of a thing that you are. Like, so are you a quarter black or like 3/4 native? Like, how much of the thing? And this for me is the best way. This is actually the very first time I had language to respond back and be like, I'm actually not fractions, I'm layers. So I'm all of those things, all at the same time. And that, for me, felt like the very first time that I felt like my identity was reconciled. That so often the ways in which this culture works is about trying to get you to pick a side, to pick a team that you belong on. But I don't belong on a team. I'm in a web. I'm in a deeply connected web to a lot of different people, and I can't choose a side and I can't choose a place. I am reconciled in layers as I am, and we all are. This idea of fitting us into these boxes that make us easier to control are not things that were created by us and are absolutely things that we constantly resist. Now, for me, what I learned was that home was a place that I create in my body. And home was in the story that I get to tell people about myself. And that's why I always want to make sure I take the time to tell that story slowly. Because it is only in that telling and that understanding and that sharing that I'm actually able to make the physical space around me such that I can feel like home wherever I go. Thank you so much.